Hello, everybody. Tonight, we are honored to be coming to you live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter with activists that are on the front lines of the struggle to end the genocide in Palestine and in Gaza, and to stop the Israeli bombardment on what we all have heard openly described as the world's largest open air prison and a concentration camp. And we would like to welcome our guests. First, Sumaya Awad, who's of the New York City DSA and has been active in the Leave It Blank struggle here in New York State to send a strong message again to President Biden and to the U.S. ruling class. Um, we don't support genocide, and that genocide needed to be answered with an immediate ceasefire and a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Samaya, would you like to say hello shortly?
Yes. Hey, John. Hey, everyone. Really great to be here. Looking forward to this discussion.
Okay, we're also joined by Annecia Steiniger, who is the daughter of Anthony Steiniger, one of our coalition members, founders, and coalition's founders, and also an activist with the North New Jersey DSA. She's been involved with the movement in Jersey for Uncommitted New Jersey, which is also along the same lines as the struggle here in New York. These struggles are all mirrored on the struggle that first took off in Michigan, but was also seen in Minnesota and Washington State with large, massive turnouts. In Michigan, it was over 100,000 people turning out to vote uncommitted as a message to Biden about genocide. And We're also joined by Cora Bergantiños-Crespo. I hope I didn't butcher your name. She is with Workers' Strike Back and Socialist Alternative. They're going to be leading a speak out in Brooklyn at Restoration Plaza at 2 p.m. on Saturday to draw attention and draw support for the Leave It Blank campaign. And we're also joined by Seth Rosenberg, one of the co-founders of the coalition, Local 100 Fightback Coalition, and Anthony Steiniger, who I mentioned earlier. So we meet tonight on a pretty important night in terms of recent events. Like we've all seen the news media today that there was a United Nations resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Now, the ceasefire has all sorts of limitations to it. It's only until the end of Ramadan, April 9th. We understand all that. We also understand that there is some very non-specific talk about it being the basis for a lasting ceasefire in Gaza. Time will tell if that will be the case, and if the pressure will continue and force the hand of the ruling classes across the world who have blood on their hands and have supported this genocide to the hilt with arms and weapons and all the things that it takes to sustain a genocidal occupation like this. But one thing that we can say is that history shows us, and our own struggles show us, that we have the power to force to shift the ground under the feet of our own ruling classes and to put them on the back foot and force them to make concessions through our unity, through our millions in the streets. It's protests like the scene you see behind me and many others that strike fear into the heart of the capitalist bosses who rule this country. And a lot of workers, they don't see the connections between what's going on in Gaza and what's going on in Sudan and other places, and they don't see the connection between those struggles and our own struggles. And they think that they are separate issues, but the overall balance of forces between our class and their class is an international balance of forces, and it matters that U.S. workers and U.S. Jews stood up in their tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions across this country to speak up and to speak out against genocide. And we have to remember that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And when people say never again about the Holocaust, They meant never again. They did not mean never again to us, to our people. They meant never again, that we can never stand silent to genocide. And when genocide succeeds is when good people stay silent because they think it's not their fight, because they think it's not something that they're informed enough about to speak on. All of our guests here tonight will show you through their own experiences that it's not a complicated issue. It's a very straightforward issue of right and wrong, and what our class is organized to do conditions the degree of horrors that the ruling class can visit on the whole world, and that what happens there can happen here. So I want to open up the floor for discussion. Sumaya, I'm going to let you go first, if that's okay. So just unmute yourself.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. Yeah, I mean, earlier today, as John mentioned, there was a UN resolution that was passed in the UN Security Council, passed for the first time, calling for a ceasefire, but a temporary one that goes through the end of Ramadan, which is just 2 weeks away, with language saying that it could lead to a longer lasting ceasefire. Already, within a few hours of that passing, the U.S. delegate to the UN Security Council made it clear that this was not a binding resolution, meaning it gave openings for the U.S. to say, actually, we don't have to do anything to ensure that this ceasefire takes place. And this is happening, as 32,000 Palestinians have already been killed in the last 5.5 months. Over 18,000 children, Palestinian children, have been orphaned. And these are just the numbers we know about. The level of destruction, the level of trauma, the level of violence, we can only see the tip of that iceberg. And a lot of it will only be made clear once journalists are actually allowed into Gaza, once aid is actually allowed in to see the level of destruction. And all of this is happening with U.S. funding. The reality is that Israel would not be able to do what it's doing in Gaza without U.S. support, political backing, diplomatic backing, and funding for the bombs raining down on Palestinians, for the guns, for the weapons that they're using, many of them that are made here in the U.S. by weapons manufacturers in the U.S. And so, as John said, this has everything to do with what we're fighting for here in the U.S., whether it's healthcare or education, or simple things like keeping our public libraries open. In New York, we now know that our public libraries are being severely underfunded. Education, public schools are being severely underfunded. There are no supplies. Healthcare is an obvious one in the US, and the list is long. The infrastructure in this country is falling apart, and yet we somehow have billions and billions of dollars to spend on war, to spend on militarism, to spend on a genocide that is happening right now, that is unfolding right now as we speak here today, that is funded by the US, and that is funded by our tax dollars. It's tax season right now. Everyone's doing their taxes. Part of that money, a percentage of your taxes that you are paying, that is going to fund the bombs raining down on Palestinians. And so part of what the Leave It Blank campaign is about is to make it very clear that no, you can't be the president of this country. You can't claim to represent the American people when the American people, by and large, have made it clear through poll after poll after poll that they demand a ceasefire now, that they demand that the U.S. stop sending weapons to Israel. And leaving it blank in the primary is showing both President Biden, but also the Democratic Party establishment, that you can't just get votes and use Trump as a scare tactic in order to silence us and in order to continue supporting a genocide, that we won't allow that to happen. Not just because we're Palestinian. I'm Palestinian, but it's not just because I'm Palestinian, but anyone and everyone has a role and responsibility to play in this, because this is impacting every single one of us. And the reality is you don't have to be of a particular identity in order to speak out. It's actually just as important for you to speak out regardless of what your identity is, regardless of whether or not you have a direct connection to this, to the struggle and to the genocide that's unfolding, because we're funding it. Our tax dollars are funding it. And I'll stop there.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, and union members, if you're thinking that that's the only way you're funding it, you'd be kidding yourself, because NYCERS is heavily invested. The New York State New York City employees retirement system, which most of us are in, is heavily invested in supplying funding, hundreds of millions of dollars of funding to Israeli genocide, to the war contractors, the military contractors that are making a killing off of this bloodshed. So when we talk about our money is going to pay for it, it's not just our tax dollars, it's our unions being actively complicit in supporting genocide. And a union that is actively complicit in supporting genocide is not a union that's going to fight for your best interests, is not a union that's going to stop the rise of American fascism, is not a union that's going to create a world where our unions actually survive and democracy actually survives. So we have to be thinking about that. It has to be in the back of our mind that these are not separate issues at all. Cora, since you're also active in the New York campaign, I wanted to have you speak next.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, like, I mean, I couldn't agree more with Sumaya. I mean, I think that this is an issue that it's important not just for the ceasefire itself and the horrors that we are seeing, but more importantly, because it's clearly disregarding, like what the majority of United States people are telling. And I think like this is part, like the importance of the campaign is like it's able to really gather the anger, of course, concretely on the ceasefire, but also on much more of Biden, right? Because it's not just like he's absolutely ignoring and supporting a genocidal war, but it's like it has ignored all the promises that brought him in the first place. And what it's extremely exciting, it's like, yeah, like I think that it's undeniable that even if weak, what happened with the resolution of the United Nations is a result of the pressure. And I think that it's extremely important, as a Workers Strike Back, member, that we keep the pressure because, okay, like the problem in Palestine, it didn't start on October 7th. It's been a long term decades. And if we really want to see solutions, we need to really be organized and sustain for like stop funding these wars, imperialist wars that don't benefit any of us in this country. And I think like what Sumaya was saying, it's exactly true, that it's like this comes at the expense of not having money for other things, of not having money for Medicare for all, not having money for tuition-free college, or for getting the student debt. And I'm also a UAW member. I'm really proud that UAW was one of the first unions that really put a strong ceasefire resolution. But I'm also really disappointed that it endorsed Biden, without necessarily putting any more pressure. And yeah, like I mean, I think that what would be ideal, is like we can keep the momentum of this campaign again on the question of the ceasefire, but also linking it on much more why we all as workers, regardless of where you are coming from, you have an intrinsic interest in really uniting and accepting power to have the ability to fight for the things we need, instead of having the two parties of the billionaires really playing the lesser evilism, and really build this momentum to use it as a launching pad to build a new party. That's basically what we advocate in Workers Strike Back, a worker party for workers and to fight for our demands.
Okay, thank you, Cora. I wanted to get Annecia in to speak now. So you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Sumaya and Cora have just said. And just going off of Cora's last point as like the uncommitted or leave it blank campaign being a demonstration of the power of, the people to stand up to the military industrial complex. And it puts our demands in a language that the establishment understands. And it demonstrates, right, the power of socialists as a voting bloc, and that, hey, there is like a viable option to the two-party system. And to go back to where we started with like this UN resolution today that has no teeth, right? That is basically useless, right? It's just something that they can put on a headline, right? That says like, oh, look, we did something. We're listening to you. There will not be a resolution to this issue until there is a single state solution in which Palestinians have equal rights, right, in which their human rights are recognized. So yeah, we absolutely have to keep up the pressure, and this is just one step in that direction.
Yeah. Okay, so Anthony, Seth has his hand up, so go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to maybe have the speaker speak again. I would like, I'm just thinking that maybe transit workers who are watching this aren't familiar with the uncommitted votes that happened in other places, and what we're trying to accomplish with Leave It Blank in New York and uncommitted in New Jersey. So maybe we could have people speak just shortly, just give like the basic facts of like what happened before, what we're trying to accomplish, and what people can actually do on election day with their ballots, and what and I know there's I think things are a little more defined in New Jersey. I'm part of the coalition communications in New York, and it seems like there's some back and forth with the Board of Elections, and they're actually trying to go out of their way to make it hard for us to register a protest vote. So maybe, I'd like to hear, we have a great panel here. I'd like to just maybe if people could say a little about the nuts and bolts of like I said, the history, what happened in other states, what might it do, and what people can actually do, and tell other people, if they think they agree with us on this, to stop the genocide, that we can send a message, what can they, tell their coworkers and stuff like that. So.
Okay. Sumaya, would you like to go first?
Sure. So the Leave It Blank campaign in New York, in many ways, was inspired by the Uncommitted campaign in Michigan. So Michigan, as people may know, is a swing state and a really important state in deciding the election. And so what organizers, activists in Michigan did is they wanted to make it clear to President Biden and the Democratic Party that they needed to change course in order to get their votes, that they couldn't continue to support and fund a genocide and just rely on people voting for them. And so they organized themselves, and they had a whole door knocking campaign in order to get people to vote, to write in uncommitted, to vote uncommitted in the primary. And this is important. So this is all in the primaries, right? And to use that to say, look, here's how many people are uncommitted to you right now because of your policy on genocide, because you're funding a genocide. And this is what this may look like in the general election come November, unless you change course. And they're very specific about what changing course means. It means you call for a permanent ceasefire, not a temporary one, but a permanent ceasefire. And you stop sending more weapons to Israel. You stop funding a genocide. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And what happened in Michigan actually, I think, blew everyone's mind, because over 100,000 people voted uncommitted, and this was not the expectation. We didn't think it would be that many people, and it really showed that there's massive discontent with how Biden and the Democratic Party are handling the genocide, that they're supporting it, and it actually put a lot of pressure on Biden and his administration to change course. I mean, I think part of the reason why this UN resolution happened is because they're feeling the pressure. I agree with what's been said. It doesn't have teeth to it, but I think it does indicate that there is a shift, that they're actually listening, and that these uncommitted votes, these Leave It Blank campaigns are really, really, really important in demonstrating to the government that this is where people stand on U.S. support for a genocide. And it's important to remember that this doesn't mean that this is how you'll vote in November. This is a primary, and that even in states that are not swing states like New York, which is a blue state, it's still very powerful and important to leave it blank. It still sends a message, not just to Biden, but the Democratic Party establishment, that even within your base, this is what people think. Even within your base, you may lose votes if you don't change course. And so in New York, more concretely, what it means is when you go to vote, because in New York, there's no write-in option, you would just leave it blank. You would leave it blank, and when you put it through the machine, it will ask you, are you sure? Because it will register that you've left it blank, and you just say, yes, I'm sure, and that will be counted. And as Seth said, we are working to ensure that those votes are those leave it blank votes are counted and actually announced on the night of the primary. And they're registered as a protest vote, because by law, you have a right to leave it blank. You have a right to do that protest vote.
Okay. So Annecia, if you can give some information about the Jersey, uncommitted New Jersey campaign.
Yeah. So I think one of the benefits of the fact that like we have an uncommitted option in New Jersey is the fact that it absolutely will be reported. Those numbers will be reported. So we actually, like, today was the deadline for us to get our signatures in for uncommitted to be on the ballot in New Jersey. Unfortunately it's like district by district, so it's still a little bit like up in the air of whether or not like all of our identified districts like will have uncommitted on the ballot. And if that doesn't happen, we will have to like leave it blank or do like write-ins in those districts. But if we were successful and if the Biden campaign does not challenge us, and I think the deadline is April 2nd for them to do so, or April 1st, then we will have uncommitted on the ballot. And then the next step is to knock on doors in New Jersey to have like a really robust door knocking campaign to turn out voters. In our district, where my father and I will be delegates to the DNC, fingers crossed, we have a really low voter turnout historically. So this is not only like, to get uncommitted, it's also kind of like a base building exercise for socialists here, to like talk to people about like socialism and what uncommitted means and what's going on in Gaza. So yeah, it's exciting, right? Either way.
Yeah. Okay, Cora, did you want to speak? Since we did, let's get. Yeah.
Just to add what Annecia was saying, I mean, I think that, like, really, it's like what I think it's extremely exciting of all this, obviously, it's that we are used in this country that, we have only two non-really exciting alternatives. And I think that's exactly what Annecia was talking about going to areas, communities, neighbors that usually don't get involved, and showing that there is an alternative and that we can collectively, when we get organized, really show our dissent and create power. I think that this is what it's, for me at least, really impressive and important of this campaign. And I think that you should definitely leave it blank if you are in New York and talk to your coworkers, colleagues, and do the same.
Okay, Anthony, I know that you got to get up early, so I want to give you a chance to speak now, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks. I really can't follow up with what has already been said. I mean, the only thing I want to add is that, to speak to my coworkers and the ones that live in New York and New Jersey, is that and anywhere really, is that everyone here is pretty much involved with left-leaning causes or organizations. But what I want to say to my coworkers is that you don't have to be a leftist to be against dropping bombs on babies and purposely starving people. And if you live in New Jersey, and if we do get on the ballot, make sure that you vote for the uncommitted delegation. It will send a strong message that people are fed up with this, and we will not tolerate our tax dollars being used to commit genocide and ethnic cleansing.
Okay, Seth, did you want to get in here?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things. I mean, I think one thing to say, is, to respond to, just theoretical, like, things that people might say is like, anyone who says that Biden is not supporting genocide, and that, he's somehow progressive on this issue is 100% wrong. The Democrats try to play this game where they're like, oh, we have humanitarian concerns and stuff like that. But Biden's response to this, to the Israeli bombing campaign, to the genocide, to the ethnic cleansing, to the mass starvation, the blockade, all of that has been horrendous. And he has gone out of his way to bypass Congress to provide, immediate weapons to Israel. And you can get, I'm sure there could be debate about it, but just if you look and you compare that to, they say Ukraine is important, being invaded by Russian imperialism, and yet, U.S. imperialism is clearly divided on that issue, and things have been frozen for a long time. But Israel, there's no stopping the money and the weapons going to Israel, no matter what it does. The Democrats play a game, and they're backed up by the media and so forth, where they say, oh, we're coming down hard on Israel. And that's just been, so you get these, words, half words on one hand, but then on the other hand, the weapons and the money just keeps flowing. And Israel is a small country, and it is, a lot of its funding comes from the United States, and the United States cutting off funding would do a great deal to put pressure on the country to stop doing what it's doing. Now, Israel is a colonial settler state, right? It was built on apartheid and ethnic cleansing, and it continues to do so, but it would weaken it significantly in its geopolitical situation if the U.S. were to stop. And so I was really excited when I found out about these campaigns. I think I found out about it from Anthony when he told me that his daughter was, participating in this in New Jersey. And I was like, oh, man. Well, what's going on? We looked up what's going on in New York, and we got connected. And so I think that's a really exciting thing. And I think that if anyone out there, I just urge everyone to, if you're in New Jersey, vote uncommitted. If you're in New York, to leave it blank. And if you want to get involved, you can look up Leave It Blank or Uncommitted on the web and get connected. They're looking for people to do phone banking, to do the groundwork that's necessary to reach as many people as possible, because you're certainly not going to get a lot of coverage of that in the mainstream media, because that's the last thing that they want to talk about. It's been interesting to watch, people have probably read these, and I find them really amusing when you get pundit after pundit trying to discount the uncommitted vote in Michigan and just say, oh, it's not that significant. They're desperate to try and downplay it. But it really was a major victory, and as people said, the ceasefire, immediately after that, you could see Biden and his team and the Democrats scared. And they haven't changed what they're doing, but they have tried to do damage control and pretend like they're doing something different. And I think you can keep the pressure on. We could talk about the election in the fall, which looks like it's likely going to be Biden versus Trump. I, for one, as a committed socialist, I believe that Trump represents American fascism, and that's a real danger. And it's enraging to me. I mean, I've been disappointed. Or not disappointed, but try to point out over and over again that I think Biden does give us a little breathing room about fascism, but nonetheless, he has run a center-right government, and that what he's doing over and over again is demobilizing the base. And this, the situation in Gaza, that Israel is committing genocide has really, and Biden's overwhelming support for genocide really threatens to let Trump win. Trump's numbers are already good compared to Biden, and so it's incredibly enraging and frustrating to me that that here we have a situation where not only are we having a horrific genocide in Gaza, but we also Biden himself, by what he's doing, is demobilizing the base, and the blame goes with him. and it could lead to, a fascist government and, MAGA brown shirts running rampant in this country. And so I think that the power, that the balance of forces are not great for us right now, but I do think that this uncommitted movement has really given us a shot in the arm and provides an opportunity to us for organize, as our very well-spoken panel have said, and that it gives us a chance to actually build and to stand up and to try and apply pressure as oppressed and working people to force a change. Both it's vitally important just because of the horrific situation, but also to try and hold off fascism in the country. I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah. To follow up on what Seth was talking about, I'm sure it must have been frustrating to all of you, pounding your head up against the wall with certain people about the absolute refusal to see that this is genocide, to see that this is all based on colonial land theft, and that history did not start on October 2nd, 2023, and that the roots of this struggle go back to the very inception of the State of Israel. And part of the things that I thought about in that moment of struggling against how stubborn the support for Israel is, despite all the facts, despite all the evidence, and even American liberals, how much they will dig in on that you're an anti-Semite if you say anything critical about the State of Israel. And a lot of that has to do with this country and its roots. And we have to remember that this country is founded on slavery, is founded on colonial land theft, is founded on imperialism, and is founded on a denial of justice for any of the victims of their crimes. And, Seth was talking about that this movement is very inspiring. Well, we've seen a previous movement in this country that rocked the world, the George Floyd protests. And we've also seen 4 years later how quickly this country will slide back into going back to sleep and forgetting all of the lessons that were learned through that struggle in terms of who has the real power in this society. And the fact that our class can mobilize to shake the very foundations of this society and can threaten the boss's continued control of society. We also know that as transit workers, when we shut down the center of world capitalism, with all of the weakness displayed by our leaders, it was our strength that showed the power of our class and the potential for our class to actually be a champion for not just ourselves, but for other workers, and empower workers and not demoralize them and force them into cynicism. So American workers have to step back and see how far we've fallen from the consciousness that we've had through struggles of the past. And we need to guard against that. We need to guard against how comfortable this country is with going back to sleep. All these right-wingers talk about woke, fear the woke. Why do they fear the woke? Because they want us all to go back to sleep, and they want to reassert their fascist dominance and control over our lives. And we need to be very fearful of that. I mean, you may not think Trump is going to win, but whether he wins or not, there are millions that follow his every word and will commit violence on his behest. At the drop of a hat on a tweet on Truth Social, can literally lead to a mass shooter incident. That's how serious this is. This is not separate from our lives at all. And we need to wake up and realize that, because the scale of the danger we face is not matched by the scale of the resistance and the scale of the involvement of working class people in that, in seeing that as their fight. And we need to understand the danger. Who wants to go next? Okay, Anthony. Well, I'm gonna let the elder Steiniger go first. Okay.
No, I just want to seize on something you said there about the fascist danger in this country, and just as what we're discussing now is the fault of the Democratic leadership, Trump, the rise of Trumpism falls at the feet the fault of it falls at the feet of the Democratic leadership. They never, for the past 30 or 40 years, they haven't provided an alternative to the rising right wing in this country. Going back to Bill Clinton, I mean, he was our first Democratic president after 12 years of republicanism, right wing. At that time, Ronald Reagan and Bush were considered hardcore right wingers. And instead of moving us toward a more progressive political sphere, what Bill Clinton did was govern more to the center and more to the right. And we haven't seen a rise of a worker power in this country until the events of last year, when we had all of these strikes and companies organizing throughout the service industries in this country. And right now, what we're seeing with Biden is he's giving the election to Trump. And that's the importance of us organizing and getting this, being successful with this, is that this protest vote will absolutely send a message that the base is fed up, and we're tired of this pivoting to the right and trying to govern from the center while workers are left behind, while the average American is left behind. You know, a lot of Trump supporters, and you know, I talked to a lot of them. I've been around. You know, I was in the military. I've been around a lot of people who are, you know, very conservative in their thinking, and a lot of them disagree with a lot of the stuff that Trump represents, but they're absolutely fed up with the Democratic Party. And a lot of them are not, you know, they're not well versed in any type of alternative other than what we have. And that's because we've had 40 years of pretty much brainwashing propaganda that's been coming down through our educational system and through our media. You know, it's like, I believe it was Margaret Thatcher that said it after the fall of the Soviet Union, that, you know, there's only one system, and that's capitalism. I'm paraphrasing her, but this is what it's like, that idea is what everybody seems to think, that capitalism and the way it's practiced now is just the way things are. It's that there is no other alternative. And meanwhile, you know, we're experiencing genocide and on the verge of a climate collapse.
Okay, so we're gonna call. I see you, Cora. I'm gonna call on Annecia first, and then I'm gonna get to you. Okay, Annecia, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I just wanted to say that the ruling class has not forgotten about the power of the people. And you can see that in the rise of all of these cop cities all across the nation. They are increasing funding for militarized police forces. So we absolutely need to be vigilant and resist this. And in the streets, and I don't want to sound scary and say that like people are going to die, but people have died and people will continue to die if we don't take this seriously, and mobilize and organize and stand in solidarity with each other. And that's it.
Okay, Cora, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Anthony was saying in terms of, like, in some ways, like, the situation right now, it seems extremely, like, impossible, right? That we have to choose between Trump or between Biden, and this on the background of, yeah, like, genocidal war in Gaza, climate catastrophe, like, really, it really feels like the world is collapsing. But at the same time, I think historically we see that this is the logical trajectory of this country. And let's be honest, like, the majority of imperialist countries in this world, I come from Spain. It's not that Europe is particularly better when it comes to international policy. And I think that, like, part of the problem, as I said, I'm a member of UAW. Like, I think it's very similar to when you win a contract. Like, we put in paper whatever it is that we win, but unless we are constantly fighting to enforce our rights, we lose. And I think it's exactly the same. And I think that what you mentioned, John, I think it was you, that there is no match right now for the scale, for the resistance that is needed from what all it's coming. I think that that's exactly the problem that we have right now, right? Like we are seeing, like again, I'm an immigrant, and Biden was elected to protect immigrants, and right now he's taking the policies of Trump, right? Like it saved absolutely nothing. And the reality is like we need, in order to build an alternative to the extreme right wing of Trump or the center right of Biden, that it's moving more and more and more to the right. The only alternative is for working people to be organized. And to be organized, I think like this Uncommitted and Leave It Blank movement is extremely excellent, but it can only be the beginning to a sustained movement that is really pushing past November, pushing in a constant basis, not only for a ceasefire, but like for all the money that it's being invested in these imperialist worlds across the world, to be invested in making college free, Medicare for all these different things. And like the Democrats have absolutely demonstrated that all they care about, it's about keeping their positions and their capitalist friends happy, and not really on working people. They only pay attention to us whenever they need us for elections and a little bit more, and that's it. And then constantly forget and or increase repression, as Annecia was saying. So I think I think it's extremely important that like this campaign is not just left on these, but that we use it as a platform to really keep organizing in a more sustained basis.
Yes, Sumaya, if you could speak, following up on the other comments, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to say two things. The first is that I think it's also important to point out that there are, that it's true that by and large, the Congress, I guess, as a whole, has been just like openly complicit in what's happening in Palestine, that the very small but vocal minority that has been pushing for a ceasefire, that has been pushing for ending all U.S. military funding, is really, really important. And that a lot of that strategy of having people in Congress, people like Cori Bush, people like Rashida Tlaib, that are demanding a ceasefire, that are introducing resolutions demanding a ceasefire to stop funding Israel, that are now pushing back against AIPAC, AIPAC being the Israel lobby group that essentially attempts to use millions and millions of dollars to fund candidates who are pro-Israel to run against anyone that is openly supporting the Palestinian struggle, openly saying genocide shouldn't happen. There's a really great anti-AIPAC campaign, like Stop AIPAC campaign, that was just launched, that I also encourage people to look up, because it's important to see how this is functioning in every level of society, to push for more support for Israel and to silence and repress anyone that speaks up for Palestine. And that this happens like across the board, across the spectrum, but that things are shifting in the US. And I think there's a reason that Israel is ramping up its oppression of Palestinians, not just in Gaza, although Gaza is obviously the most important and extreme example with the genocide, but in the occupied West Bank, or Palestinians who live as citizens of Israel, that they are being brutally oppressed and repressed. And that is part of, Israel is losing the ideological battle right now. It is losing support very, very, very quickly. I think the really difficult thing to contend with is that what it took for people to wake up is a genocide, right? What it took for people to be like, oh, what is happening? How am I complicit in this? How's the US complicit in this? Is for over 32,000 people to be killed, and for this famine to be killing thousands more. And so I think it's the question that we all need to ask ourselves right now is, what am I doing to stop this? And leaving it blank is one thing you can do that is so easy, that takes very little time, that is very simple. It's very simple to talk to your coworkers about it, to talk to the parents of your friends' kids at their school, at the grocery store, like anywhere you go, to get talking to people and say, go and leave it blank, or write uncommitted if you're in New Jersey. And then beyond that, to call your local representative and make sure they understand that they need to be on the ceasefire resolution, and register, like let them register that you disagree with them if they're not, as well as going to protests, organizing campaigns, etc. That all these things, they seem very small, but the reality is they add up to have major shifts. And if the last 5 months have actually proven that. the fact that, the ceasefire resolution that Cori Bush introduced in early October, I think at the beginning had just a few names on it and now has over 50. And it seems small, but that is indicative of a wider shift that is happening. The fact that UAW, which represents millions and millions of workers, a union that Biden went out to support their strike right before October 7th and is calling for a ceasefire. I think there are major shifts in the US, but it requires every single one of us to keep pushing, to not slow down, to not let the news cycle move on, to not forget about this or have this become normalized, but to actually keep pushing, especially now, keep agitating to ensure that there's a permanent ceasefire and that we stop sending weapons to Israel.
Just to follow up on that, I've been involved in the New York Foundation of the New York Labor for Palestine, the New York section of the Labor for Palestine Coalition here in this country, and it started out with meetings of rank and file trade unionists, and a lot of the people that I met in the course of these meetings, these are people who are on the front lines of the fight in Amazon, who are on the front lines of fights in whatever union they're involved in, whether it's 32BJ, whether it's 1199, our union. And when people think that these struggles, that the oppression and the genocide going on in Palestine is something that we can't do anything about, or that it's something separate from rank and file struggles, it's really a reaffirming lesson that that actually it's something that unites us. That actually, just like the anti-apartheid movement against South African apartheid, it united struggles that eventually led to much wider struggles of Black Americans against institutionalized racism in this country. A lot more consciousness that led in the direction of undoing those structures, because when you see the oppression elsewhere, you begin to see the connection to the oppression that we face on an everyday basis here in this country. And workers of color being involved in those struggles actually strengthened. It wasn't a diversion from the class struggle. It was actually a reinvigoration of the class struggle, because we learned lessons by being involved in building international solidarity, because it made us see our strength, and it made us learn lessons about what kind of struggles win. It's narrow struggles about wages, hours, and job conditions that exist in a vacuum, or a class-wide struggle that unites us with every worker in the same position to greater or lesser degrees of exploitation. We begin to see our class. We begin to see what the future can look like. And it's not about whether we win those struggles or whether we lose those struggles. It's about the lessons that we learn by going through those experiences with other workers and sharing those experiences, because it's like a ripple. It's like a pebble in a pond. It always has a ripple effect. It always leads to other struggles. Struggles, whether they win or they lose, they breed other struggles, because the underlying contradictions of this society are so immense that there is no possibility of there not being struggle. The question is, will our class be at the forefront of those struggles? Because without our class, none of us have the power to be able to make the changes that we need. Any further speakers? Because we're trying to wrap up in about 10 minutes. So, Annecia, I see your hand. I'm going to go with Cora first, because I went with you last time. Okay, so Cora, go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow on what you were saying, I mean, I think that one of the things that in Workers Strike Back we are trying to do is to link this Leave It Blank campaign in New York with the broader picture. That exactly, I think it goes to what you were saying, John. Like, why, if you don't have any connection with Palestine, you should care and really connect. I think, like what we were talking at the beginning, like all the money that is being sent for imperialist war, why it's not being used at home, and try to go to the communities and try to make people realize that that's how we build power. Like in Workers Strike Back, we think like part of our demands is definitely good jobs, higher minimum wage, but also fight oppression, right? Because only when we fight oppression and avoid divisions is when we have the strength to really put up a fight. to the big ruling class. And of course, all this linked to the need of really get an organizing tool for working people, a new party. And we are trying to really make the connection with this specific thing that it's the ceasefire, with the broader picture of how we can really build a world that works for working people, that it's when we get organized and really, yeah, are ready to fight back.
Thank you. Annecia, go ahead.
Yeah, just I come primarily from the climate space. So like all of our struggles being linked is something that I think about on a daily basis, right? Like there is no future like in which we avoid ecological collapse if we're not thinking every day about like worker justice, right? And like land back, right, for indigenous people, and about women's rights. And I think people don't really talk about how like what's going on in Gaza is also an ecological disaster, right? And the climate impacts of war. So yeah, all of our struggles are linked, and all of our liberation is, you know, dependent on liberating each other.
Yeah. Well, I think also American workers need to check their own privilege, like that. We have to understand that no working person is free in the world unless all workers are free. That freedom is about freeing humanity from the barbarism that capitalism visits on us on a daily basis. And that you can't be a good trade unionist if you don't fight sexism. You can't be a good trade unionist if you don't fight homophobia. If you can't be a good trade unionist if you don't fight racism, because these are the toolkits of our enemies. These are the weapons in the hands of our most brutal enemies. And Trump is just one of them. He's just one manifestation of how the ruling class as a whole thinks about us. Our lives are expendable to them. Transit workers, that number that's on your pass, that's how they think of you. They really will step right over your dead body and keep it moving. We've seen that during COVID, 173 dead transit workers, for no other reason than the ruling class of this society made a decision that it was more important to run a mass transit system 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during one of the worst global pandemics in the history of the world. And they didn't care about us getting PPE, even though they had it. They didn't care because they didn't want to scare us, to tell us how bad things really were. And that's a society that is anti-human, and that's a society that will collapse under the weight of its contradictions. And the question is, what kind of society, what kind of next step, or what kind of different society will we be? Will we descend into barbarism and fascism? Or will the people who produce it all take control of what we produce and organize a society that is worthy of our humanity? And so that's what we have to think about. When our union leaders tell us that this is a separate issue and we don't understand this and it's not our fight, they're handing us over on a silver platter to the bosses because they're weakening us, and they're basically telling us we don't have any power to do anything about it. And we've seen the course of history in the past few months shows that that's not true. Seth, did you want to get in here?
Yeah, just I think quickly, I like the turn that we've gone to talk about, how it's so important for workers to think about the broader political situation and to have what we socialists call an internationalist perspective, not an international, but an internationalist, which is that international solidarity, that the working class does not belong to a nation, right? That the nation is a concept where that wants to tie us to the people who exploit us, right? And so that international, the workers are in every country, and that we're brothers and sisters, and that examples of that, like apartheid would not have fallen without international solidarity around the world. The ANC and other radicals there fought hard, but without international solidarity, apartheid would not have fallen. It's everything is connected. Like immigration is a big issue in this country, and yet we're told these reactionary lies by Trump and MAGA, but also by the Democratic Party, that blaming the people who are fleeing violence in their countries, and a lot of that violence is caused by American capitalism, right? Exploiting those countries, and that's never discussed, right? That that the fight that migrants are facing, the fight in their own country that migrants are facing and that they're fleeing comes from the fact that the people who exploit us, American workers, are the same people who exploit and destroy countries like Honduras, Guatemala, places like that. And so it's really important to connect up these struggles, whether, another couple of examples are that, in the 1934 Teamster strike in St. Paul, where they shut down the entire city, they did not just focus on their own union. Homelessness was a big problem and hunger was a big problem. And they set up things in order to provide food for the people of St. Paul, and won massive popularity that way, and were able to fight off the police and the ruling class that way. Having a wider political perspective there allowed them to the victory that they needed to win, right? And people like George Orwell people from Europe, socialists going over to fight in the Spanish Civil War on the side against fascism. All of these things are examples of having a perspective of solidarity, where it's not just economic interests, it's not just your own country, but having a wider perspective. And that's why our coalition, Local 100 Fightback, over and over again, focuses both on issues within our union. We were deeply involved in the struggle in the last contract, exposing the lies from as they tried to privatize our retiree healthcare. But we also focus on larger issues, whether it's police brutality, whether it's issues of the genocide going on in Palestine. And so and having a great panel like this of people who are incredibly brave and well informed and are deep in the struggle, to provide that perspective to transit workers that they might not hear anywhere else. That's it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Sumaya had to leave, but she, we really appreciate her contributions. Anthony, I know you got to go soon. So Anthony, you want to speak before you go?
Yeah, I just want to kind of tack on to what Seth was saying right there. And a lot of the issues that are going on in the world right now, as far as outsourcing and the issues that we're having with immigration can be summed up with what Seth was saying. And the fact is that corporations are multinational now. If you look, they're all international. They're linked. Capital went international years ago, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, but labor has failed to do that. And they're using all of those things that you mentioned, the tried and true way to divide people: sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, racism, all of those things, to keep labor from going international, to make you think that the guy that is sitting next to you on the subway is your enemy, and not the guy who's building a $100 billion casino to further exploit you. That's how it's done. If labor is able to go international, truly go international, then we would see real changes in this world. And to remind my coworkers also that every benefit that we have, every single one, from the weekend to health insurance to unemployment insurance, every single one of these things that benefit workers, they came from struggles, from people putting their lives on the line. It came from people being out in the street, people protesting, people participating in the simple campaign that we're trying to promote right now, an uncommitted or leave it blank campaign. Simple things like this make real changes. Yeah. And that's all I have to say for right now.
Following up on what Anthony said, one other thing that was synonymous with all of those struggles is that the most oppressed were at the forefront of those struggles. They were largely undocumented immigrants with no legal protection. Our union, founded, one of the foundational events in the history of our union was the Kent Avenue power plant occupation, occupied by undocumented immigrant workers who were facing outrageously brutal conditions, dust in the factories. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire What happened there could have happened at Kent Avenue. Very same condition, brutal, racist managers. And they told New York City Transit, you have 2 days to concede to our demands or we'll shut the power off to New York City Transit. And they got support from the surrounding community to prevent cops and other thugs from coming in and breaking their strike and breaking their action. And it's one of the foundational events in the history of our union. But your union leadership now goes around blaming homeless people for the problems we face, targeting fare evasion as the problems in our system. Yet our system is founded on $43 billion of bond debt to a bunch of white, overwhelmingly white, rich bankers, hedge fund speculators, parasites. They're the reason why we don't have the things that we need. And the New York ruling class that rules the society, rules New York State, the Democratic Party, is responsible for those conditions, the fact that public services are not funded. And they want to set up this war of all against all. And an eye for an eye leaves the world blind. And we'll slit each other's throats while they keep going to the bank. We got to wake up. We have to realize where the real solutions are. There are solutions to these problems, but no one in the ruling class wants to solve these problems. They only want to solve them for their own economic benefit. And we have to understand that it's only our class it has an actual class interest in solving any of these problems. And if you're waiting for any other class to come and save you, you're going to be waiting a good goddamn long time. And you ain't going to be happy with the rescue they come with, because the rescue is fascism. Okay, anybody else want to speak? No? Okay. We'd like to thank you all for your contributions, and I'm glad I was so well spoken that I was the last speaker. I appreciate it. I always appreciate that. So speaking of being well spoken, we expect people to continue to comment in the comments on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. We want to hear what you think. We want people to start calling into these live streams. We want to learn from your experiences. And you don't have to feel like if you disagree with anything that we say, that you can't be part of that discussion. We have disagreements amongst the people here on this live stream, but yet we still know which side of the barricade to be on in the struggles that are coming. So we need to start having much wider dialogue. We thank you so much for your time. We know it's late, so we're going to wrap things up, and we'll talk to you real soon. And also, everybody should please check out the Working Class Power Hour tomorrow from 1 to 2. It's myself and a trade unionist from Chicago going to be talking about similar issues. So we look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Good night. Thanks.
Good night, guys.